Hi everyone. So here's to another video to continue our lessons in poetry. Alright, so we read Ozymandias, as you remember, which was by Shelley. Can any of you remember what kind of poem that was? Think of it to yourself. Okay, if you thought to yourself that it was a sonnet, then you are correct. Ozymandias was a sonnet. That means that it's a poem with 14 lines and 10 beats per line, right? So 10 syllables per line. So if we go back to Ozymandias, I met a traveler from an antique land, line 1, 10 beats, who said, "To vast and trunkless legs of stone," 10 beats. So it continues to go on and on like that through the entire poem. There is only one stanza, okay, and it's 14 lines. All right. You may have noticed also in Ozymandias that the punctuation and the grammar isn't quite the same as it is in prose, i.e. non-poetry. Poetry doesn't have to obey the same rules as prose. With prose, you would expect to write sentences of different lengths, but in poetries, your ideas will often have to fit the shape of the poem, and sometimes the number of syllables in a line, if that's the kind of poem that you want to write. So anybody who wants to write a sonnet will know that each line must contain 10 syllables, and the whole poem needs to be 14 lines long. So, what I want you to do is go back to Ozymandias, okay, and compare it to the version on this page, 138, which I have posted with this video. And it reads, we're on number 1 here. "A tourist told me this story. He said that he visited the site of a ruined statue in the middle of the desert. The statue had no body, but there were 2 gigantic legs still standing. And he saw the fragments of a face which was half buried in the sand. The look on the face was cruel." Okay, so that was Ozymandias, half of the poem anyway, written in prose. Now, what I want you to do is to continue rewriting Ozymandias, okay, but write it in prose. Forget about the poetry, write it in sentences as if you were writing, just like you wrote your regular paragraphs for me about the Word Hunters collection, okay? And just tell the story of what's being told in the poem, okay? So that's one thing that I'd like you to do. Next, we're looking at number 2 on this page. Poetry is usually written in sentences, but some poems break the rules. Actually, many poems break the rules. Have a look at the extract on page 138 here. I'll read it for you. "Ancient, gray mountains, giants against sunlight and darkening western skies until tomorrow's dawn." So, think about what the poem's about. Okay, something very complicated. Now I want you to rewrite this poem in prose. Okay, so in regular sentences. Okay? And then try to think about the differences between them. Okay, so let's recap. In the first question, we read a paragraph in the story of Ozymandias, half of the poem that we read. I want you to rewrite the other half of the poem in prose, right? So non-poetry. Okay, just like the first half of that, just like in number 1, the example. Okay, so you're basically telling the story, retelling the story of Ozymandias as we read before. Next, I want you to answer questions A, B, and C from number 2. What is the poem about? That short one that I just read. Rewrite it in prose, and then identify the difference between the two versions, poem and prose, right? What do you think the difference is? Okay? All right. So remember, prose is a style of writing or speech that is not in verse, right? So it's not poetry. It can be used to inform, explain, argue, persuade, comment, tell stories like the Ballad of Sir Patrick Spens, for example. That told the story. Okay? All right. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay? You can ask me on Skype. You can ask me in Hangouts. Or you can just post a question right on Classroom. Okay? All right.